Good morning, church. Before I get started this morning, if you want to be turning to John chapter 10, we're going to be there in a couple minutes. But as we begin, I want to ask, and it may be a little awkward for just a second, but all of our graduating seniors from high school, if y'all don't mind standing up for just a second, you can do that unified all together so it's not as awkward. I like you made eye contact with each other. If we also have any college graduates, grad school graduates, absolutely. Y'all may be seated. I know some of them were nervous. I was going to ask them to come up front right now or do that. If you are willing and able, tonight at 6 p.m., we have a great opportunity to honor them as each of them will come up front and share for 2 or 3 minutes on just kind of what this church has meant to them in their journey, what God's doing, their excitement for the future, who they want to thank. It's a really special time. There will also be tables kind of out in the lobby, one table, and this kind of becomes a big deal as you see the pictures and the jerseys and the trophies and other things. But it's a chance for us as a church congregation, if you want to bring a card or just words of love and wisdom, a favorite Bible verse, anything like that would be welcomed. And just also know as they read through those, I think over time, as I look back on cards and other things that I received half my life ago, I realize is when my senior Sunday was back in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And it's just awesome to watch them grow and to launch out into the world. We're so excited for them to be able to do that. And tonight's a great chance for us to worship together and to be able to lift them up, to pray for them, and to encourage them in their journey. And so seniors know there will be a lot of faces out here encouraging you, not giving you a hard time. So we're excited about that. If in John chapter 10, we're going to jump in and talk about the Good Shepherd. But before we do that, I want to kind of mention a few things, contextually and just a couple stories. There are certain smells in our life that just really just bring back instant memories. Some of those are great, some of those are terrible, and anywhere in between. But one story that our teenagers know is I've gotten several opportunities in the last decade to go to Scotland. I love the people there. I love the accents. I love the history. It's wild to be driving down a road or riding down a road as I was, not able to drive. And as we're riding down the road, and I would see a really old, immaculate-looking building. I said, "What is that building?" And they said, "Just some old church." It's like, "Well, how old is that?" And they're like, "I don't know, 1400." 1300? I don't know, it's old. I was like, that's older than anything our country's ever dreamed of. Like, that's crazy to think how old and all this rich history. But as I spent time with the people there and just fell in love with the culture, one of my favorite smells on the planet, this is weird, I'm going to go ahead and embrace my awkwardness as I share this story. One of my favorite smells on the planet is the detergent they use in Scotland. I'm sure it has less to do with the kind of detergent and more to do with my memories associated with it and the people and other things. So as I left the country for the second time, Matt Moore and I were there, and as I left, I had the house mom that kind of hosted us, her and her husband, missionary family. As we're getting ready to leave, I said, "This is a strange request, but can I wash these couple jackets and this blanket in your detergent so that I can go back with that smell?" And surprisingly, she was like, "Yeah, that's great." And so I didn't attempt to do her accent. But as I watched that, I smell it. I wanted to wear it rarely just so I could, relish the memory. I get how weird this sounds out loud, and I really don't care. But it's a strange thing about me that smell reminds me of my family over there, the people I love. So fast forward about a year, Robin and I and my boys go to visit her grandparents in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And as we're there, I'm in line for standby because they had placed one of my sons sitting way in the back of the plane by himself. That would not have gone well for anybody. So I'm in line, in the standby line, to talk to one of the attendees to ask them if they'd please move my 6-year-old son to sit with his parents because it's not going to be good for anybody for him to be solo. And as I'm waiting in line, I notice a smell. And it was a gentleman in front of me, he's probably in his early 60s, and I noticed the smell from probably 2-3 feet out. And it was the detergent from Scotland. I haven't seen his passport. I haven't heard his voice. I have no idea anything about this guy. So I kind of lean in closer. This is where it gets super weird. And I kind of just, chemistry style. I didn't put my nose on his shoulder, but I just wafted the smell. And I just instantly was in my mind transported to Scotland. So I tapped him on the shoulder. This is where it gets weird. Tapped him on the shoulder. And I said, "Excuse me, sir. This is strange, but are you from Scotland by chance?" And he said, "Aye, how'd you know that?" And I went, "Your detergent?" And he just went, and he got out of line. I assume he didn't even fly home that day. I assume he left the airport thinking America is weird land where people just sniff you and ask you where you're from. It's a strange place. And it's true. We do that. I do that. Of course, thankfully my wife was not standing with me in line because that would have just embarrassed her to no end. But she knows that's what she married. So congratulations, honey. So as we jump in, the reason I bring this up is there are smells in our lives. I brought up one that is joyful to me. There are other smells that as parents we recognize. Kids coming home from the ballpark, not a great smell. Or a van full of teenagers coming home from Six Flags after a long hot day in June. The Chaco estuary smell is not great. Other smells that are just wonderful of fresh cookies or brownies being baked in the oven. I'm sorry for the hunger I just put in your mind. But all these different smells, but there are two different distinct animal smells that I could name out of an animal smell lineup in a heartbeat. One is a chicken farm. I'd prefer to never smell it again. I could just describe it. I'm not going to do that because those of you who just went, ooh, you know, it's not a good smell. I've smelled that smell on the interstate with a truck full of chickens as I'm driving behind it, and I would rather pull over or revoke my driver's license than drive behind that again. Another one is a sheep farm. Sheep have a very distinct odor. You could say the same for every animal, I'm sure. But as we jump in and talk about sheep and sheep culture this morning, yes, sheep culture is an actual thing that has been studied. There's a study that was done back in 93, I believe, by UCLA joining up with Cambridge University. And as they started studying about sheep and sheep culture, they realized, without even meaning to, they compared a lot of things that Jesus compared us to in Scripture. They would not have acknowledged that. I'm sure they'd probably recant their story if they, in some ways, if they realized how synchronized it was with New Testament words of Jesus and talking about sheep. Jesus repeatedly talks about sheep, and he compares them to us. And when you really look at it in context, it's kind of offensive because sheep are known for being dumb animals. They're known for repeating the same mistake. They're known for wandering off. Plenty of times in sheep herding culture, a shepherd will have to take a small baby lamb, a ewe, and if it continues to wander off, he knows or she knows that if it wanders off enough times, it's going to get eaten, it's going to get destroyed, it's going to get lost, it's going to starve to death or get picked off by an animal. And so the safest thing it can do as a shepherd is to take his or her staff and to hit the lamb in the leg and break its leg, to mend its leg. But then over the course of the next 8 weeks or so, as that bone sets and as the lamb is kept safe by the shepherd carries it around on his or her shoulders, and they keep it to safety. They put it down to eat. They put it down to sleep, takes it to the water to drink. Without that shepherd physically picking it up, carrying it where it's going, and taking care of it, and during all of this time bonding and realizing that I am completely dependent on this shepherd for my life, during that time, that sheep typically ends up staying the closest to the shepherd, both in proximity and in relationship. As you think about other parts of the study, and it was fascinating to read that there are even like cliques within social groups of sheep within the same flock. I could look out at a group of sheep and there's no difference as I look at them, unless there happens to be one that's a different color or just hugely different in size-wise. But for the most part, you look at this flock of sheep and they look about the same. But they talk about these social groups and how certain sheep, because of a differential in size or something's a little bit different about it or has a different color eye or say it grows its wool differently. Yes, these are all real things. They will ostracize that sheep and it has to graze by itself, hang out by itself. They can develop nervous tics. They can get depression. Sheep can deal with depression. What in the world? And you're dealing with these animals that I could just look at a flock of sheep and just say, dumb animals. But I think there's so many times where Jesus could look at us as a group and say, dumb animals. Thankfully, a lot of the times with the sheep that were with us, he was more gentle. He was not gentle with those who claim themselves to be shepherds, like the Pharisees. We'll get to in a minute. But as I think through this laying out of the good shepherd and what Jesus meant by that, I want to give you one more contextual item before we jump right into Scripture, is that the term good shepherd didn't start when Jesus declared himself the good shepherd. I didn't know this until I was studying recently, but there are references as early as 2217 BC from the Sumerians, where the king of the Sumerians, or the ruler, basically the tyrannical ruler of the Sumerians, traditionally called himself. Over generations, each king would then name themselves the good shepherd, the gentle shepherd, or the humble shepherd. They were not that thing. It was an ironic and a crazy name to give yourself, considering how they lived their lives in that empire. But they would call themselves the good shepherd because they wanted to have a humble image, at least, even though they were practicing things like human sacrifice or terrible crimes against other nations and other things. As you have this powerful leader that gave themselves an ironic name like the gentle shepherd, but then they led with a sword. It was hypocrisy, but that spread over into other kingdoms. There are references of the Assyrians, the Akkadians, the Mesopotamians, and the Egyptians loved that phrase. I'm not sure why, because you could argue they were probably the most violent and most oppressive of those leaderships. But they would use this term, the good shepherd. So historically, as Jesus jumps in here, Jesus rarely, I can't imagine a situation where Jesus just misspoke. He picked his words so carefully. And as he addresses himself in front of this crowd, which we'll get to who it is comprised of here in a second, he calls himself the good shepherd. That was not lost on this crowd, specifically the Pharisees. I can kind of picture this situation where as he talks about sheep and a shepherd, where the people of the group, the non-leadership, the non-Pharisees, would kind of hear this as this is how you follow, this is the protection you need, this is kind of the message for me. But the religious elite, and those who consider themselves the rulers of the day, if you rewind just half a chapter earlier into John chapter 9, you have this, I'll give you the 10-second version. You've got this man who's born blind. For 39 years, he lives his life completely dependent on the generosity of others, sitting outside the temple, getting given coins. His parents can't afford to just keep him up. I mean, he's a grown man. Relatively older age considering the life expectancy of this time, but 39 years old, and his entire life he's never seen anything. He's dependent on others. He can't work, so he's dependent on this goodwill of others. And Jesus comes up to him, spits in his hand, mixes that around with dirt, wipes mud in his eyes, tells him to go to this pool. It's about an hour, a mile and a half away. So he walks away. He's still not seen Jesus. He has no idea who's doing this. But he takes a chance. He takes a walk on faith, washes out his eyes. He can see. He comes back dancing and celebrating. I'm assuming that. How could you not just celebrate if you've just seen for the first time your literal life has been given to you? There were people, including Jesus' disciples, that saw this man and openly said in front of him, who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he was born this way? He's a sinner. Somebody in his family messed up. That's why he was born with such a terrible, problem of not having his eyesight. And so he's getting these things said to him all the time. I can't imagine the angst he lived in and the anguish he lived in, just daily knowing and just feeling like he was always lesser than because he had been punished because of his parents or because of him. Who knows what happened? And so the guy's then brought in and basically put on trial in front of the Sanhedrin, this ruling council. They declare him, because they can't possibly say what happened is holy and we acknowledge Jesus as the Lord, and he's able to do this. So the easiest thing for them to do is to cast him out of the temple. They even bring in his parents to grill them and said, was he really born blind? And they say, yes, he's born blind, but as to who healed him, we don't know. Ask him. He's a grown man. That's obviously a paraphrase. But as he leaves the temple, such a cool context that he leaves the temple, they kick him out, and he walks outside, and Jesus is already there waiting on him. Like, he's just watched all this unfold. He knew, Jesus didn't have to go in there and watch the trial. He knew what was going to happen. They kick him out to punish Jesus in a lot of ways. So they kick him out, and Jesus embraces him, and they have this moment where he comes to find out that Jesus is the one who both healed him, and he's the one who claims to be the Messiah, and it says he worships him, and he worshiped Jesus. This face-to-face moment where I picture they embraced. Again, I'm a visual learner. I kind of just see things in my head, but I pictured him just kind of embracing him in just this worshipful moment of pouring out his heart to Jesus. And the Pharisees surround at this point. A crowd gathers because they've just known this guy got kicked out of the temple. This is not a time for him to be worshiping or celebrating. In Jewish culture, to be kicked out of the temple means you're not allowed to go to heaven. Like, you were banished from worship. If you can't enter the temple, you can't make your sacrifices. You can't go in there and become cleansed. You can't, you were seen as unclean forever, which he already kind of was before. Like, he finally gets his sight to where people might stop saying, you were born a sinner. And that same day, he's kicked out of the temple. So instead of going out and being upset, he's still so overwhelmed. He's gracious. He's full of gratitude. He hugs or embraces Jesus, and they have this moment of worship. The Pharisees surround him. Other people surround. I imagine this guy's parents are still around. I don't know that. I'm guessing. You have this group. Jesus' disciples are there. So you have this mixed group of some people who strongly believe in Jesus, some people who are still plotting. How can we trip him up? How can we get him killed? There is no break. In my reading, there is no break between chapter 9 and chapter 10. It's easy for me as a kid to picture the disciples as they wrote out scripture saying chapter 9, verse 1. And like them writing out, they were just writing letters. They were writing their memories. And in order to be able to reference easier, chapters and numbers for verses have been given and assigned. Those meant nothing. There's several books that would definitely be considered out of order, or letters that are probably unfolding in the improper order. Not saying it's not inspired word, it absolutely is. But just the way they're read is not necessarily the order they were turned in as the disciples' homework assignments. That's not how it is. So as this letter flows, you get the situation where the man born blind embraces Jesus. The Pharisees come out and they try to, again, attack / question Jesus. And they say, at the very end of chapter 9, they say, what, are we blind too? Referencing the blind story. And he says, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. So Jesus turns to the most powerful guys, at least within the Jewish rulingship, especially within the religious community, and he says, you're guilty. You just don't do that. And for Jesus to do that was, again, that just fuels their fire. We got to kill this guy. We can't shut him up. Like, how do we make him stop? And they're always trying to trip him up, and they always fail. And so as Jesus tells them, you're blind, you're guilty, we instantly go into the next verse. And Jesus says, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, he addresses them directly. Anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. So to put a little context on this, about 3 years ago, I went to a place called 1818 Farms, and you can look up, their website is 1818farms.com, and it's a small 5-acre farm in Mooresville, Alabama. And this farm is almost drawn out of a cartoon fairy tale. It does not, if I hadn't been there, I would promise you I would argue about the validity of what this was like. But I go to this farm because John chapter 10 has always been a special chapter to me. With my time in Scotland, one story I didn't tell you is that my first experience there is as I was driving through, I'm looking through this chapter. I've read some of those studies with the UCLA and Cambridge, and I kind of know some of this context. So I told Adam, who was the missionary there, the main preacher, we're driving down the road after this youth retreat, and I told him, I said, at some point while I'm here, I would love to, this is super strange, again, that's just kind of how I operate. So it's super strange, but I would love to just get out and run through a sheep field and see what happens. So within 2 seconds, he slams on his brakes. He said, sheep field. Like, we're in Scotland. If it's not a city, it's a sheep field. And so I go over and it's like, is anything like bad going to happen to me? Like he had this evil look on his face kind of. I was thinking, am I going to get mauled or something bad going to happen? Is there a shepherd like just waiting to like hatchet me? And so he said, no, you'll be fine. And so I go over and this 3-foot fence or so, I kind of jumped over that, and I've got a bus full of Scottish teenagers laughing out a window because they know what's about to happen. I didn't know. And so I jump in, and the sheep are within 3 or 4 feet of this fence until I step over. And then they start bleating, not bleeding. They start screaming at me and running all different directions. They're looking around for help. They think they are being invaded. They literally were being invaded by America. So I stepped over this fence, and as I stepped in, I'm wearing my Chaco sandals. It is always wet in Scotland. Even if it's dry, not raining, the ground is always wet. I didn't know that. Sheep fields are gross. And so I take off running through this field, and after about 3 seconds of sprinting, I look down and my legs are like black all the way up my shins. And it's a sheep field. It's all the things that would be concocted in the sheep field, and it was gross. And so I kind of walked miserably back to the van because I've got a 2-hour bus ride to get back. The real punishment, though, was the smell I brought back in with me. I said, all you teens that just laughed at me, you get what you deserve. And so they enjoyed that smell all the way back to Cumbernauld, the city we were staying in. But as I got back in, sheep are gross. They have a smell, but they do not trust a stranger, ever. So fast forward to when I go to 1818 Farms, I met the farmer who runs this farm. Her name's Katrina. Her and her husband and 2 kids set up this farm to teach people how to run a self-sustaining farm. They run some crops and other things. But the weird thing, the thing that really I would not have believed, and it seemed like a fairy tale, is that the proximity she has with the animals, the time she spends with them, every animal, over 100 animals on their farm, all of them had a name. She could tell them all by sight or even by sound which one it was. I put her to the test. I'm talking about sheep. I'm talking about goats, chickens. Every chicken had a name. A chicken would walk up and she bent down, like she talks to chickens. She bent down and she picked up this chicken, and it's like just kind of like kissed her on the cheek. And she's talking to this chicken, and she said, hello, Frank Sinatra. That's his name. Frank Sinatra, the chicken. And she picked him up, and he, like, ate an apple out of her hand, and she's talking to him. But as she said, she would call out to an animal by name. I tested her. I said, please do this. Like, I'm just so interested in how this relationship works. I said, she'd tell me some of the names, these bizarre names of these animals on her farm. And Marilyn Monroe was one of the goats. And she said, Marilyn. And she said that, and this goat comes trotting up and just puts his head up against her side and, like, lets her pet it. And I said, give me some of the names. And I tried it. Nothing. They didn't even look up. Some of the sheep names, they have baby doll sheep is the kind of breed. They're beautiful sheep, if a sheep could be beautiful. But these cute little cartoony looking sheep with huge wool. And she had them. And I said, all right, I want to run an experiment with you, but I want your permission. I'm talking to her. I said, because I'm reading this in Scripture, and I understand, the danger they see from a stranger. They don't know me from anybody else. I'm not a dangerous person. I would never intentionally harm anybody, anything. So when I said, but what would happen, hypothetically, Katrina, if I were to step over this fence and just take off running at your sheep? She said, you're not going to do that. I said, okay, but let's talk about it. At least what would happen? She said, it would not go well for you. I said, okay, but let's talk about it. She said, well, we have 2 shepherd dogs. If you haven't noticed them, they're sitting by the back fence. And they had 2 Great Pyrenees dogs, the smaller of which weighed 155 pounds. The bigger one's about 170. They were a brother and sister combo from California that she had gotten and trained up with these sheep. Their one job is to watch the sheep, protect the sheep. Their names were Bowser is the brother, and Princess was the girl, which I thought was awesome naming. But she said, if you were to just run in there and I'm not with you, and she hears the noise those sheep would make, they would attack you. And I said, are there stories of that happening? And she said, about 3 weeks ago, a coyote got dumb enough or brave enough or both to jump the fence at night and to run in and try to take one of the sheep because they've got, lambs had just been born. They were real small. And one of the coyotes was trying to kill one, steal one, and run off with it, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And so as this happened, Princess, Bowser was off duty. They kind of rotate who's doing the night watch. Princess runs in, jumps into the fence, so the coyote jumps out of the fence. Princess jumps out of the fence, chases it to the tree line, and within about 100 yards had caught the coyote, bit it on the back, broken its back, and just left it. Which I realize is a violent image I just gave you. I apologize for my tiny children and others in the room. But the image of a shepherd defending his sheep is not pretty. It's not gentle. And at times of danger, it's not humble. Princess jumped into action, just snapped the coyote, left it there, didn't drag it off anywhere. It wasn't, to make a point. It was to leave it there to let the other ones know this is not a flock you're going to mess with. They very rarely have attacks. Princess and Bowser are very effective. But as I went in there, I said, well, okay, I'm not going to go in there because I don't want to die because of your dogs, but can we go in there together and see how it goes? So we go into the fence and ran a couple tests, and I said, all right, well, let me try to call some of their names or at least bend down and approach them. And I bent down and just started saying, here, sheep, whatever. I don't know how you call sheep. I've never done that. So I bent down and kind of said, come here, whatever. And they look up at me. They look at Katrina. She didn't say come here. She didn't whistle. She didn't say their names. And they just went right back to grazing. And I said, okay, go ahead and whistle at them. As soon as she said the first syllable, come here, sheep, and all of them flocked over and just waited at attention. I tried picking one of them up, which is kind of gross because their feet are in the mud and the nastiness. But for the example, I picked one up, and it was freaking out and jumping and trying to get out. But as soon as she had her kind of hand muzzled kind of around one of their chins, and I picked it up, it then turned to me, starts licking my cheek. It was almost like she'd given it permission to be comfortable around me. That's crazy power that this shepherd has over a flock. Because she knows if she declares something dangerous or stay away, they're not going to trust it ever. And Jesus uses these examples. As we talk through the dangers that surround sheep, animals that are susceptible to dangers, both emotionally and physically, and all the different things that we go with as a flock, that we go through as a flock. We have a shepherd that we're going to get into here in Scripture in just a minute of a good shepherd, of Jesus declaring himself a good shepherd in verse 11. But this, even him starting out saying, talking about sheep, and the shepherd has abused their power or led them in the wrong direction. As soon as he started talking, I imagine the Pharisees got really frustrated and really upset because they know, at least they start to understand that he's talking about them. As we jump to the next verse, it says, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. Again, taking you to specifically Middle Eastern sheep herding culture, a lot of times several different shepherds from the same area would let their flock graze together during the day so it's not so boring. They can hang out together in the shade. The sheep are all grazing together. But as you look out and just see all these sheep together, again, it's easy to not know which one is which unless they were marked or painted or some identifying marker. It's very difficult to know. But sheep, the cool thing, I mentioned that sheep smell is so undeniable. You know the smell. And that smells are so, olfactory senses are so strong that memories are associated with them. Sheep can identify their shepherd by two ways, much easier than sight. Just seeing a human, I kind of think it's funny to think that sheep just look at us, all humans look the same. They don't know. But by smell, they can identify their shepherd by smell. They spend enough time in the shadow and in the proximity to their shepherd that they know what he smells like. They know what she smells like, and they're able to find him that way, or by their voice. I think that is such a neat reminder of us being in proximity. You can't possibly recognize the voice of somebody you're not around very often. I can remember a time when Wyatt, my oldest, was about 1. All my boys have done this over time, but when I was about 1, this is my first experience being a dad. And so I remember being at Winterfest. I'm around a ton of kids. It's later in the evening, and so many kids in this room, and we're going through stuff. Wyatt's in the back of the room. Robin's holding hymns, getting ready for bed, and I get on the microphone to kind of bring everybody to order. And as soon as I said, "Hey, everybody, we're going to come on in, sit down," Wyatt in the back of the room, she goes, Daddy? And starts looking around because he hears the voice on the microphone, but he doesn't know where I am, but he recognizes the voice. And of course, to me, I stopped everything I'm doing, like, this is the best moment of my life. You have those milestones. But to me, to realize this kid has heard enough of my voice to know who I am, to recognize my voice, to be looking for me. He wants to see me because he hears me. He doesn't know why he can't find me, even though my voice is so close. And I think if we spend time in the proximity of Jesus, then we recognize his voice. The scarier converse of that is if we don't spend time around his voice, then we don't recognize him, then we don't know him, then it makes it very difficult for him to keep us safe. As we continue forward, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away, just like I experienced, because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not even understand what he was telling them. So as he's unfolding, Jesus is basically saying, you Pharisees have taken this flock, they trust you, you're supposed to be leading them, but you're making it all about yourself. You're trying to hold on to this power and make sure that nobody takes it from you. And you're trying to make sure that nobody else comes into power. And they wanted to make sure and just hold on to that. And because of that, it made them selfish. It made them a lot of things. But they had just that same day, moments before, kicked one of their sheep out of the flock. Literally, they said, get out of here. You're not welcome anymore. There goes your salvation. They kick him outside. And Jesus, the good shepherd, brings him into his flock, welcomes him, and then defends him from the same shepherds that were trying to get him just a minute ago. But the Pharisees didn't realize right then. A lot of times, it's easy for me to look at so many times in Scripture, especially with the disciples, Jesus does a miracle, and after the miracle, he says he did this so later on they would get it. He did this so later on, as they're writing these stories down, and they start to realize, oh, this is what he was trying to tell us. This is what he was trying to do. So Jesus, as he spoke in codes, or sometimes it was heady enough, or just, I don't know if he intentionally clouded their judgment, I have no idea. But as he spoke about them, right to them, there were times where Jesus sometimes was cutting them down or putting them in their place, and he said it in a way where he thought he was building them up. There's some of them, I imagine, where he's talking about the good shepherd leading their flock, that some of them were thinking, yeah, we are good shepherds. We are leading the flock. And then Jesus almost sneak attacks them later on in verse 11 by saying, and I am the good shepherd, and kind of turning it on them, and I'm sure they were just fuming. But as we continue to look forward, he says, therefore Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in, go out, and find pasture. I'm going to leave this up there, so as you kind of read through it and think about these things for a minute, the sheep, a lot of times in that community, in the sheep herding community, and this still happens today, a lot of times where the houses were kind of arranged around a small community, they would have a middle courtyard. And it was more substantial. It had more of kind of a fence and a gated off area. They would take turns, the different shepherds, as to who was on watch at night, kind of like Princess and Bowser. And they would watch and they would wait and they would make sure they were safe. There was never a time where these sheep who were so loved, and not only are they just property, they're revenue, but they're also in a lot of ways these close connections where they're keeping them safe and they know them. To know a sheep, and I watched Katrina do this. I had her close her eyes and tried to get random, this sounds so weird. I was taking acorns and throwing them at individual sheep so they would make a noise, and Katrina could name them by name because of the noise they made. It was unreal. I'd never seen anything like that. Sometimes it took her a couple guesses, but she was able to do that with the goats and even some of the chickens, not all of them, but some of the chickens. She was able to know them because of the time she had spent with them, the noise she had heard. At a distance, I could not tell you the difference between these sheep if my life depended on it. But she knew them at 100 yards as to which one was which by the way they walked, by the way they were around some of the other ones, proximity to the other sheep. That connection was real. So as I think through this gate it talks about in Scripture, a shepherd has this relationship, but they also are fiercely defensive of not these property, but these creatures that they love. As Jesus talks about him in code at first, being protective of us, he is so fiercely protective over us. There are times where we bring on problems and other things on our own, but he's not going to let us get attacked from the outside without them at least hearing about it, and not them being called out on it. We go through things, we go through struggles and trials, but he protects us, and he's there for us. But when they would stay out, and sometimes they would be grazing until the evening, and then the shepherds that are out there with their flocks would set up, they'd have an area set up that was kind of stacked up, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, that's just kind of a stone wall that goes around, and it would have 3.5 walls set in, and then an opening for the door. And the shepherd would literally lay himself or herself across the gate to where any sheep that wanted to get out would have to climb over the shepherd. Any animal that wanted to come in and intrude would have to go through the shepherd because it was the easiest gate, the point of entry. And the shepherd is saying, I will physically lay myself in front of danger to keep you safe. There's no way you can get out unless you go through me. There's no way you can get in unless you come through me. I think that's a powerful image. And then one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I like this other version that's in the Message. It says, a thief is only there to steal, kill, and destroy. Very similar front. It says, I came so they may have real and eternal life, a more and better life than they ever dreamed of. A story that I've shared with teenagers for years is, and it's strictly hypothetical. It's important that I note that on the front end because it sounds insane. But as Robin and I, we have 4 boys, but if we were to, and again, strictly hypothetical, I need to recap that. So we get another son, hypothetically, and this son comes into our family, and once we, get him home from the hospital, and we love him, and we're going to cherish him like our other boys, but we decide to do something different, something we would never do in real life. So we decide to take this son and allow him to live in our kitchen's pantry, instead of having the normal life that we provide for all other boys. And so we decide to place him in this pantry, but I'm not super mean. I'll renovate it. I'm going to open it up some and make it a little more spacious. We're going to put a big fluffy pillow in there. We'll have a light. We'll, of course, have enough space under the door to slide sandwiches and other things under the door. And throughout Pantry Boy's young life, that's what we're going to call him, throughout his young life, we're going to read to him under the door. We're going to talk to him. He's going to know our voices. And he's going to have as normal a life as he can for living inside of the pantry of our kitchen. But as time goes by, and as he grows, and as we get to know each other, and continue this weird experiment that I'll never do, please don't report us to DHR because we do have a foster son. But as we continue this hypothetical path down, by the time he turns 18 years old, I start telling him when he's 17, be ready, because when you're 18, I'm going to grant one wish. Anything you want, but be thinking about it because it's only one. Make it as big or small as you want. And he's thinking about it. And for a year, he's thinking, he's planning, he's dreaming. And his 18th birthday comes around. I said, okay, Pantry Boy, what's it going to be? And he says, I've thought about this for a year. I'm trying to narrow it down. Here's my thoughts. Maybe some new books. Like I really haven't read. Like I've read this one so many times. I'd love to read something besides just this. Or my pillow's starting to get really flat. If you could get me a new pillow. The light burned out 3 or 4 years ago. If you could give me a new light bulb for in here, that'd be awesome. And he keeps coming up with these ideas, and you're probably thinking what I would think, ask to get out of there. Like, you want to see the sky, you want to see the world you've read about in books, you want to get out and to have interactions face to face. I want to see my mom for the first time. Like, this is such a bizarre and ridiculous comparison. But that's what I think about when I think about John 10:10. For Jesus to say, you come to me with your dreams, you come to me with your ideas, and they're awesome. Our seniors are going to talk tonight about their plans, where they're going to college, what they plan on doing for careers. All those things are fantastic. But I think that God receives our plans, and I almost picture the scene from Evan Almighty, or Bruce Almighty, whichever one it was, when he's standing in the driveway talking to God in this hypothetical conversation, and he starts making his plan. He goes, that's not what I planned for, God. Like, I had big plans, and I wanted to do this. And God starts laughing in the form of Morgan Freeman. Starts laughing. He goes, I always get such a kick out of people when they tell me about their plans. Not because our plans are bad, but he has a more and better life than we ever dreamed of. Like you're dreaming about a better light bulb and more books and a fluffier pillow, maybe some more headspace because he's probably 6'2" by now, and he's got no space. And instead of just saying, I want to dream huge, you can only dream as big as the world you realize is around you. But a lot of times we don't realize how big that world can be. We don't realize what God wants to do. So he says, give me your dreams, give me your plans, give me your hopes. Hand them to me and let me just explode them and make them a whole lot bigger. That's what I always think about with this verse. As we kind of land here in just a minute, it says, I am the good shepherd. So Jesus declares himself for the first time right here, the good shepherd. So he's not comparing the good shepherd to the Pharisees. He's taking this old historical term of a Samaritan king who's sacrificing people and murdering and killing other groups and doing terrible things, sacrificing to idols, and then calling himself the good shepherd. Jesus is taking that old term, reappropriating it, and justifying it. From the Pharisees all the way back to 2,200 years before. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And again, this confuses them because the good shepherd traditionally had sacrificed others to prevent harm coming to himself. He'd conquered other lands in the name of the good shepherd. He had spread his own name as if it was a god sometimes, all in the name of a good shepherd. Whereas Jesus is saying, I'm the good shepherd, and very soon I'm going to lay down my life for these sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd. It does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the fathers know me and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. So he pulls off all the punches right here and he says, I am the good shepherd. Forget the historical context. Forget the Pharisees. Forget everybody else. I am the gatekeeper. If you want life, you come through me. If you want to sneak out of the gate, that makes me really sad, but you can't do it without me knowing about it. And he says, I know you and you know me. We're family, and I'm going to lay down my life for the sheep. When he really turns it on his head for me, when it really becomes confusing, is when he says, I'm going to sacrifice. I'm declaring myself the good shepherd, which in a lot of ways in this culture would have said, I'm the all-powerful ruler, but I'm pretending to be humble. But then he says, but I'm going to be the one to sacrifice. This is so confusing for those that grew up in this time. It's confusing for me now. even having the knowledge of history and other things with us. I think if, I don't begin to know what Jesus would do if he was just to walk up into a group that I'm a part of now and just begin to give a narrative and comparisons and, analogies. I don't know what that would look like because we don't know just tons about sheep culture. That's not part of just the world around us a lot right now. I'm sure he'd have great comparisons and other things, but for him to go to this group and say, I am the good shepherd, do you think I mean all-powerful ruler? I do. But I'm also the only deity and son of a deity that has been worshipped that wants to sacrifice on behalf of the created. The creator sacrifices for the created. That's so bizarre to me, that we have a God that would be willing to sacrifice in such a large way, such an extreme way, such an extravagant way for him to give up his own son so that we can be with him. So Jesus comes in and says, I'm going to lead, I'm going to protect you, you can follow me, I'm going to lay down my life, and if you really want to follow me, you've got to give up your life too. So no matter who you are, if you follow through this whole story and you start to realize what it means, no matter who you are, you get uncomfortable if you really try to live it. And this is not something I say from experience and I've mastered it at all. It's something I say because it is difficult. And I look at myself from the outside and think there are certain times, the first half of this sentence is going to sound braggy and then I'm going to beat myself down, just so you'll know. There are certain times where I feel like a good dad, certain days where I feel like a good husband, certain days where I feel like a good youth minister, a good leader. I rarely feel like all those things at once. Because you're spinning all these plates at once, and one of them is constantly fumbling, and you feel like, doing awesome with the youth trip today, but I just yelled at my kids. Shoot. Yes, accidentally, sorry. Or days when just things are going so great with the kids, and so great with Robin at home, but then, there's something going on that's just difficult to deal with work, or with the teens at church, or whatever else it is. We all have those struggles. We all have those battles. Jesus doesn't ask us for perfection. He doesn't ask us to meet him in the middle. He just says, surrender, and I'll pick you up. I picture myself. I won't put anybody else in this situation as we close this morning. I picture myself as that dumb sheep that wanders off over and over and over again, and it took Jesus coming in and unfortunately having to break me and fix me and keep me with him, and now I don't want to leave his side. There's still days where I absolutely stride too far away, or I start just being distracted, or start wondering what's over there. I was the classic kid of just wandered 3 grocery aisles over from mom. Just classic. As much as I get on to my boys for that kind of stuff now, I was that kid. I was just always curious as to what else was out there. I love to explore. But Jesus is telling us the only safe place is for us to be in his proximity. If we can't hear his voice, we can't know him.